Welcome back to the Brain Tour, all you budding neuroscientists. All right, going to continue along today, mostly talking about the frontal lobes, but I thought I'd make it a little fun if I could. So here we are on our sightseeing bus. What is it we're going to see? Zombies! I'm going to talk about this in the context of zombies and the zombie apocalypse a little bit because it's just a fun way to do it. You'll see the link and it'll help you remember, I think. It really is with respect to the frontal lobes. And I want to tell you a little bit about frontal lobotomies and why they were done and what they told us about things and how this kind of connects with the zombie stuff. Do I have another? I have to remember the slide. Okay, so here we go. So let me give you a little bit of context with this white screen first. Let's imagine a time before we really had a lot of drugs. So yeah, just let me back up, to my lecture on addiction. Remember, I talked about some of the problems with drug-based treatments. These drug-based treatments are pretty new. And in fact, one of the things that happens a lot in psychopharmacology, that's the area where they try to develop drugs to help psychological conditions, they are all trying to target the drug to get smaller areas of the brain. Remember how I told you that, doing something with serotonin can affect the whole brain? I didn't come back and close the loop on that, so I want to now. So when I talked about selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, what's that selective? The claim is they're doing a better job of just getting the brain part that you want to target and having fewer side effects. So that is the game of drugs, finding drugs that do the thing you want while reducing the number of side effects and hopefully, focusing on drugs that are not highly addictive, that do not develop that tolerance all that strongly. Okay, that's the game now, and there's a lot of people playing that game of continually developing that drugs. But before that game, there was a time when there were no good drugs to help people with mental conditions. And in fact, to give you a taste of this, have you ever heard your mother or somebody else look at some mess and say, this place is bedlam? Some people, at least in my cultural background, they'd use that term bedlam. And bedlam actually was a mental institution. And it was one in the pre-drug period. And so mental institutions at that time often involved, they were horrifying places with people running around, naked or half naked, some people chained to or tied down to chairs or chained to walls, and they were often screaming and acting crazy, and that is bedlam. And so, that's this term bedlam, of a place that's just completely out of control. One of the big problems that people faced is that if a patient was violent, if they were attacking other people, what do you do with them? If you don't have drugs, you have to tie them down in some way, right? To stop them from hurting other people. But that seems horribly inhumane. It was in this context that, let me back up here. It was in this context that frontal lobotomies were kind of created. And the idea was this. Imagine you had a brother or sister that was having severe issues and they were violent all the time. And a doctor came to you and said, there's this quick little procedure we can do, and your brother will no longer be violent. The violence will just disappear. All that anger, all that you see, it will be gone. He won't have to be tied up anymore. He'll be allowed to walk around freely. Would you like this procedure done? A lot of people said yes. So let's talk about the procedure. Frontal lobotomy. It's a relatively easy procedure. Basically involves sticking an instrument, roughly an ice pick kind of thing, into the brain and swishing it around, severing several critical connections within the prefrontal lobe. And it leads to what's called a lobotomy. Basically what you do is you prevent the frontal lobe from talking to the rest of the brain. And it turns out that this does indeed cure violence. And in fact, the original Ortiz, the guy that did this originally, got a Nobel Prize in medicine for lobotomy. It's often considered one of the biggest mistakes the Nobel Committee has ever made. But let's just read this. This procedure transforms psychiatry A new psychiatry may be said to have been born in 1935 when Moniz took his first bold step into the field of psychosurgery. Sounds so heroic, eh? And when Moniz was awarded the 1949 Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology, the New York Times hailed the explorers of the brain who had invented this sensational operation. Hypochondriacs no longer thought they were going to die. Would-be suicides found life acceptable. Sufferers from persecution complexes forgot the machinations of imaginary conspirators. Surgeons now think no more of operating on the brain than they do of removing an appendix. It is just a big organ with very difficult and complicated functions to perform, and no more sacred than the liver. The tale America had been telling itself had wound its way to a wholly satisfying conclusion. Lobotomy was the fruit of both good science and humanitarian empathy for the mentally ill. So it was hailed. When this came out, it was really hailed as something, and partly that was because at some level it worked. A lot of these claims they made were true. Why? Well, because it kind of took people and made them into sort of zombies. So this is not very, very easy to read. I'm sorry about that. I will go through some of this stuff. But here are some of a prefrontal lobotomy, this is especially what we're going to be talking about here, was applied to schizophrenia, particularly successful because present functioning areas are disconnected from memories and from future concerns. So the area focused on the present has no access to memory or future concerns. Here's the side effects: inability to plan ahead, indifference to the opinions of others, childlike actions, intellectual and emotional flatness. This is a zombie-like state. This is a person that just is never excited, never sad, never happy, just is behaving in a very childlike way, is very seldom spontaneous, has no ability to plan or think strategically, is just kind of alive. Etc. Now, notice that other versions of these things have been done for depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, aggression. So this is the aggression one we talked about, etc. And so these worked. They cured the thing that was troubling the people, but they left the patient in this state of just being alive. And so overall, it was not seen as such a great thing. Okay, so let's kind of go into the frontal cortex, and then we'll come back to the zombies in a moment. And so we can, yeah, absolutely, let's go to the 3D brain again. Here it is. Oh, come on now. You were all warmed up and ready to go. I'm going to have to fire back up again. Sorry, this will take a second. Okay, so we go back to our 3D brain, and now let's go to our frontal lobes. And in fact, this is the frontal lobes in general, but I want to now do this split. So let's look at motor cortex, this band right here. And again, remember the band right behind it, which is going to be sensory cortex. I'm going to connect with both of these. But these are very interesting areas. So here it says the primary motor cortex directs movement by controlling muscle contractions. Okay, so let's kind of get into this a little bit here. We have this strip along our lobes, each on the left and the right. Now, this is one of those contralateral things, okay? Let's talk about that. I'm going to bounce back and forth a little bit, which I should be able to do better. But this side, this motor strip controls, well, that was kind of cool. I didn't actually mean to do that. But that motor strip controls the other side of the body. So this one controls the right side of the body. This one controls the left side of the body. So we have that contralateral organization going on. But if we looked at this strip, and if we kind of mapped it out, and I'll explain to you what mapped it out means, but yeah, we're gonna have the same story. I'm debating whether to talk sensory or motor here for now. And in fact, I think I want to flip to sensory. So I'm gonna go to temporal lobe. It's the same story, as you'll see. Oh, and it doesn't have the, okay, somatosensory cortex. Here we go, in the parietal lobe. There we go. Notice, right behind it, same kind of idea. In both of these strips, whether it's sensory or motor, they're organized in a very particular way. So let me talk about the sensory first, because I think it'll make sense first. If we poked your body in different spots and we looked at what part of this brain lit up, we would first of all see it does light up. And so if things are touching my right arm, parts in my left sensory cortex would receive that information. If somebody touched my right leg, it would be a different part. In fact, we can see things like this, where depending on where you touch a person's body, a different part of that sensory strip lights up. But it's got a couple of interesting characteristics. So one of them you see here is that it's proportional not to the size of the body part, but rather to the amount of sensory input that the brain gets from that body part. So notice here that our legs proper, even our feet, even the trunk of our body, there's only a little bit of cortex devoted to that. But look at our hand. Okay, our hand gets a whole bunch of cortex here. Whole bunch is devoted to our hand. Why so much devoted to our hand? Because we feel. This is where we get a lot of our sensory input, right? If we want to touch something, we use our hands. And so we have all of this rich sensory input ability here to feel the fine details of things. And that's because we have so much brain processing what our hands touch. In contrast, look at the elbow here. Little tiny bit of brain for the elbow. Pinch your elbow. Pinch it really hard. Really, really hard. You can feel almost nothing from pinching that elbow. Very little brain tissue devoted to that, and therefore you don't have very much sensation. Do the same to your lip, and you'll feel a lot more pain because your lips actually have a lot of sensory cortex devoted to them, as does your tongue. So kind of interesting. The brain represents the body not in terms of the size of the features, but in terms of how much input they bring to the brain. Or we can almost say it the other way around. The more brain tissue devoted to a specific body part, the better you are able to use that body part for sensation kinds of purposes. And so you will see sometimes these homunculi, that shows them in the textbook, I think, a big-headed, big-handed beast that shows what the body would look like if it was proportioned the way the brain represents it. So you see big lips on these guys, and yeah, they're kind of funny, and we're kind of see it here, kind of split apart. Now, so now this is the same for the sensory and the motor. What's the difference between these two? This is input, okay? So the sensory is when things touch our body, that brings the input to the brain. The motor strip will be very similar, but it's output. So once we've taken an input, we've decided what we want to do, and now we want to do something, we need to control the muscles in our hands and our legs and our body in order to complete the task. This is the part of our brain that sends the signal to our body. And again, the left controls the right of the body and the right controls the left of the body. And so if we wanted to pick up something, we would see all sorts of this part of the motor cortex light up as we were reaching in and grabbing and picking up something, okay? And so whether it's input or output, this same idea of the homunculus and the brain representation is the same. And it's kind of interesting that those input and output strips are sort of right side by each in the brain. Just kind of cool, I think. Okay, so we got that. All right, so back to the prefrontal. So let me just say, sorry, I'm going to go back to here. Just as we think about primary and association areas, remember we talked about those in primary occipital cortex. We talked about primary temporal cortex being tucked underneath. And this is now the primary parietal cortex. The primary input for that, and everything else we talked about previously was the association cortex part of it. This is what's called the primary motor strip. But again, it's not a primary input strip now. This is about output. This is about acting on the world, which means the rest of this is kind of like association cortex in the frontal lobe. But again, it's not trying to make sense of input. Now it's trying to control our output. It's going to be the part of us that decides what to do with all this information that's come in. Okay, so If we now damage someone's prefrontal cortex, we see a lot of problems in terms of their ability to behave in normally complex ways. So specifically, here are some of the things we see. The slowing of thoughts and the loss of spontaneity. They don't just suddenly decide, hey, I feel like chocolate ice cream. I'm going to go get chocolate ice cream. No, in fact, somebody with a lobotomy is quite happy to do the exact same thing every day. And often that involves sitting on a couch in front of a TV, smoking cigarettes, playing cards, something like that. And they can do the same thing absolutely every day. They are not quick in their mind. They tend to be very slow thinking, slow acting, and repetitive, habitual, doing the same thing over and over again. They suffer from something called perseveration errors. So we're going to talk about this a little bit. I'm going to give you this card sorting example so you can get a sense of the importance of this. So actually, I think there is a good, let's try. I think online, if I do the Wisconsin card sorting test, hopefully there's an animation, or we can actually try it. Introduction about this implementation, blah, blah, blah. Run the demo. Okay, use the mouse. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. An item's going to come up. Okay. So in this task, you will need to match a card to one of the 4 tasks presented at the top of the screen. Click one of the 4 cards that match your card on the left. Following your selection, you will get feedback. If your match was not correct, you need to try a different rule. You'll see what this means as we do it. So let's do it. Press Q to quit and start the test. Okay, let's just do it. Okay, here we go. So this is our card, 2 stars. And what it's saying is we have to categorize it. And it's going to fit one of the things. It's either going to go with the other gold things. Okay. Or it's going to go with the other. So there's 1 star. I'm going to pick the one that there's 1 of. No, that's not it. So we're not sorting by the number. Maybe we're sorting by the color. No, we're not sorting by the color. So then we should be sorting by the shape. See, that's a star. So if I pick stars, excellent. So now I know we're sorting by shape. So that's a star. So I pick the one with stars. Now here's the thing. Once I figure it out, it's a circle. So I go with the one with circles. It's going to change at some point. This is the one with stars. Okay, everything's fine. I've learned the rule. Match in accordance to shape. Fantastic. Hopefully you guys all see why I'm picking the ones I am, because I'm just matching the shape of the card. Now at some point, there it goes. It's changed. Shape doesn't work anymore. So now maybe it's the number of items. So let me try that. All right, so it's the number of items on the card now that I have to pay attention to. So there's 3 there. And so we keep doing that for a little while. 4. And 1. And 1. Yeah, this lecture is you watching me play a funny little game. But it's going to change again, and I want you to feel the change. And it does. It will change. Soon. I hope soon. Okay, so it's changed. So now it's not the one that's 4, and it's probably color now. So I'm going to go with color. Okay, so now I match it with color. Okay, so hopefully you can see these cards have a number of dimensions. There's the shape on it, there's the color those shapes are in, and then there's the number of shapes. And you sort by one of these dimensions, but you don't know which one. And so you originally pick one, and you try it, and you can eventually figure out what it is that's relevant. And so in this case, it's color and everything's fine. But the cool thing comes when they change the rule on you. And we'll see if we can do one more change really quick. When they change the rule, so right now we're sorting by color. If I had a frontal lobotomy, I couldn't get off this color thing. I would keep picking based on color, even though I know that's not right anymore. I just persevere. I continued my old selection, even though it keeps telling me I'm wrong. I don't stop and say, okay, it's something else. It must be maybe the number of items. Okay, well then it must be the shape of the items. There it is. Okay, so let's stop this. No, I'm going to hear that all the time. So that's the Wisconsin card sorting task. And what people with frontal lobotomies do is once they find something that works, they stick with it even when it stops working. So imagine you going through life. You're going through and you're trying a certain behavior. Let me give you an example. When I went through high school, I didn't take a lot of notes and I didn't do a lot of homework. I just listened in class and I was able to succeed. When I went to university, I tried the same thing. I just listened in class and I got bad marks. And I had to learn eventually that old way of behaving isn't going to cut it. I am going to need to do something different. This is what our frontal lobes help us do, to be flexible, to understand that this old way of acting isn't right, consider new plans and actions and put them into place and see if they work better. So in university, I started doing things like reading the textbook and doing my homework, and then my grades got better. Okay, it took me a while to figure that out, but I figured it out, and that's the frontal lobe we use to do that. And so just to give you a sense of that. Also, let's go to 3. Loss of self-awareness and flat affect, especially empathy. So there is this notion that if someone around you feels like, let's say they're crying and feeling really sad, you feel that sadness a little bit. That's called empathy. And sometimes that encourages us to go say, hey, are you okay? Is there anything wrong? Can I get you anything? Any way I can help you? So often empathy creates social bonding, creates experiences for social bonding. Somebody with a frontal lobotomy, someone can be sitting beside them crying or in pain or whatever, and they're just like, whatever. They don't feel it. They don't share it. They're not worried about it. And in fact, in general, they just have what we call this flat affect. This sense of affect means emotional state. So they're just kind of blah all the time. Okay, I gotta pause this for a second to get this phone. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, sorry, weird interruption. Get my head back in here. There we go. Yeah. Okay. So we were talking about point 3 here. I think just that people with frontal lobotomy lack this emotional reactivity. That's right. We've already kind of talked about 4 a little bit. The frontal lobes are where all your foresight, your planning, and your ability to be flexible in terms of your behavior. And also, by the way, your inhibition. If you think for a moment about, and let's go back to perseveration errors just to make this point because it's a good one. If you think a little bit about COVID, the new normal involves us often not doing things we did before, not shaking hands, not hugging, not high-fiving, not coming too close to somebody else. It also involves us sort of doing new habits, but those not things, those inhibition kinds of things, that's what the frontal lobe, especially if we have a habit of doing it, right? And so the frontal lobes, if you have a lobotomy, you continue to do those old things. A frontal lobotomy patient will be terrible in COVID. They would act like COVID didn't exist. They would just continue to behave how they always did. But the rest of us, for example, have to learn to inhibit certain things, not to do certain things. And our frontal lobes are really key to that, which is one of the reasons some of the interviews I do when we talk about things like bars and restaurants reopening. If people have a drink or two of alcohol is a disinhibitor. It makes it really harder for you to inhibit things. And so that's often why, we run into problems in the COVID situation. People stop following the rules after they have a beer or two. And that's kind of like their frontal lobes get shut down. And so think of that too. Your frontal lobes are inhibiting things that you shouldn't be doing. They're figuring out what you should be doing. They're changing your behavior if the rules change, etc. They allow us to be flexibly adaptive to the world. Now let's do this last one because this is kind of a funny one. Tendency to confabulate. Confabulation is sort of like lying, but really bad lying. We all lie. And in class, I say, hey, who here doesn't lie? And there's always a person or two that puts their hands up and everyone laughs at them. Let's think about what lying is for a moment. When you lie to somebody, you're trying to make them to believe something's true that isn't true. And so you're kind of manipulating them. And in order to do that, you have to understand them pretty well. And you have to be able to predict, hey, if I say things this way, they will think that, or they will take it whatever. So it's a very high level, deception is a very high level cognitive act. These guys aren't very good at it. If you and they will create ridiculous stories if pushed to do so. So if you take one of these people and you say, "Hey, tell me about your brother," they might say, "I don't have a brother." But if you say, "Yeah, you do, you have a brother Doug. Tell me about your brother Doug." Well, at some point they'll start telling you about their brother Doug. They'll start saying things. They'll tell you things, and they're things that you could very easily show to be false. So they're really bad at lying. They just make stuff up that's patently untrue, and they can't seem to do the subtle ability of lying in a sneaky way that could be successful. That is your frontal lobes. That sort of manipulation of others. The frontal lobe is trying to help you reach some goal, something that, and you're trying to figure out how to do it. And again, without your frontal lobe, you kind of don't have a goal to begin with, let alone you don't think about how to accomplish it. Again, you live more like a zombie, walking around. And while we're talking about zombies, I just want to leave you with this. Every now and then I'll throw in a recommendation for you. This is a kind of freaky one. So there's a movie called The Serpent and the Rainbow. It's about an anthropologist going to Haiti, I think, to sort of follow up on this notion of the creation of zombies by voodoo priests. Can they create zombies? And I don't want to give you away too much of the movie, and I won't, because it in fact has a twist halfway through it. But the basic idea is that they would take people who had wronged them. So who are they? First of all, they're very powerful, the voodoo priests, but they're also sort of a political power in the world where they live, and you don't want to mess with them. If you do mess with them, what they would sometimes do with somebody is they would first of all give them some of this chemical you can get from a puffer fish, that in fact completely paralyzes your whole body and reduces your breathing rate to a very, very shallow level. Shallow enough that often a doctor will proclaim you dead. And so they give it to somebody, this person is dead. They put this person in a coffin. They bury them underground for some prescribed amount of time. During that amount of time, the person is breathing very shallowly, but there's only so much air down there. And so their brain is not getting enough air to sustain their life. By the way, they are paralyzed and yet still able to sense. So they are going through a horrific, they've been buried alive, and they know they're being buried alive, which is scary as heck. After some amount of days, this person is dug up. But because they have been oxygen deprived for so long, parts of their brain are damaged, especially their frontal lobe areas. And so they dig these people up, they bring them back to life, but they are not the person they were before. They are zombies. And they intentionally want those people out there because they want other people who might cross them to say, "Oh my goodness, that person crossed the voodoo priest, and look, they are now a zombie. They've been turned into a zombie." Freaky. All right. So this movie talks about an anthropologist going and looking into this practice, and then the movie gets weird from there. It's not science. It's I guess science fiction. You'd call it that. But kind of fun to kind of think about this whole issue a little bit more. Okay. That's the tour of the frontal lobes. Give you a sense of what they're all about, and your tour of the brain more generally. And in fact, this is chapter 3 more generally. The only thing I want to say, kind of going out of chapter 3 here, is that we're going to leave the brain, but we'll never leave the brain. We're going to talk about various other processes, especially cognitive processes, things like sensation, perception, memory, etc., learning in subsequent chapters, but we're going to continually kind of bring it back to the brain because neuroscience is where it is, where it's at these days. And you have to consider things in light of the brain. So you're going to learn more about the brain as we go, but hopefully now you have a good sort of general understanding of what it is, what the various parts are, how information is transmitted, the role that neurotransmitters play, all that kind of stuff. And we will take off on that all throughout the rest of the course. All right, I will see you in chapter 5. Remember, we're going to skip chapter 4, leaving that for Professor Danielson next term because it's one of his areas. So I will see you in the sensation perception chapter. All right, bye-bye.